Tēnā koutou te whana o te karaiti, tēnā koutou ngā manihi. Nō mai haramai ki tēnei whare o marama. It's my great privilege to welcome you here today to St Luke's for this one-day seminar. And I'd particularly like to welcome our guest speaker, David Galston. David, as you know from reading the flyer, is the Academic Director of Westar Institute, which has hosted for a number of years the Jesus Seminar. He's also the Ecumenical Chaplain and Adjunct Professor at Brock University in Ontario, Canada. So welcome, David. We are blessed by your presence here. Quoting from Michael Luning, now Michael Luning is a cartoonist, kind of close to God. He writes, "There are only two feelings, love and fear. Only two languages, love and fear. Only two activities, love and fear. There are only two motives, two procedures, two frameworks, two results, love and fear, love and fear." And I would add there are only two religions, two theologies and two churches, love and fear, love and fear. We're here today to learn, to connect, to think, to explore, to be open to new thoughts. We're here also to build and strengthen our links between us as a progressive ara. Presbyterian culture says that all gatherings should open and close with prayer, but it doesn't define what prayer is. And if it did, many of us Presbyterians would ignore it and do our own thing anyway, which is also part of our culture. So let us be still. We're all interconnected, all part of the one great wholeness of the human family. Some of us feel settled, some of us are on the path to shelter. Some of us are lost and bewildered. And all of us are on a journey to find the truths that connect and heal, reconcile and restore, inspire and build community. Holy compassion be the ground on which we walk, be the common path from which we talk, be the common thread which binds us together, healing, restoring, and blessing. Amen.
Is my mic on? Is it going? Is it okay? I thought maybe not everybody was present yesterday evening, so I thought I would just touch a little bit on some of the things I did yesterday evening or tried to do, and then move forward. Where I want to end this morning is with the understanding that in our postmodern world, the truth is now a performance rather than a claim on reality. Now, I hope I get there, but I wanted to just review a couple of things I said last night, because I think some of it either didn't hit the target, or I had a bit of criticism on some of it that I think was a bit misdirected, with taking Plato a little bit too literally. And Plato's not a literal thinker because he's an ancient thinker, so he can't think literally. Only modern people can think literally. That's our accomplishment. That's our science. We're very good at it. But ancient people don't think like that, so it's kind of difficult to take Plato that way because he's not a modern thinker. But the reason why I wanted to start with Plato is just because he's an example of another kind of thinking. That was the point. Another kind of thinking in relation to the way that we think. We think scientifically, we think literally, we think with this, what I called last night, epistemological form of thinking, that is to say a technical form of thinking. But Plato and ancient Greeks didn't have that kind of thinking. And they had, their thinking was called theoria, which means observation, and we get theory out of that, but for them it means a vision. They have visions of things. And so Plato's theory is not a theory like a proposition about reality. It's called the theory of forms. It's not a theory about a proposition about reality. It's a vision about how he sees and explains reality and knowledge. And it's not horrible. We like to make it horrible. We have a problem with it because Christianity liked it. And we got out of it heaven and hell. And who likes that? And we took it very literally. And Plato became Christianity for the masses. Why did Christianity succeed so well in the Roman Empire? Well, part of it was because the Roman Empire was Platonic, and Christianity just came in there and became Plato for the masses. So I got to explain who Plato was. Obviously, I'm saying all this stuff. I better back up. But the reason why I wanted to start with Plato is two reasons. One is because I'm a philosopher. I can't help it. I'm a philosopher. I'm trained to be a philosopher. So this is where I'm going to start. You invited me here. I'm a philosopher. This is where I start. The second thing is, it's important because we need to take Plato before he was Christianized and see that he has a different kind of thinking that's still important to talk about today. A different way of thinking about reality. It's not a claim or propositional way of thinking about reality. Here's a fact. I'm going to give you the facts. It's not like that. It's a vision. It's a vision that includes how do we think? Why do we think the way we think? So, Platonic thinking starts with, so I'm going to use other words now today, starts with the unconditional, and then moves to the unconditional is what cannot be said, what cannot be spoken, what really can almost not be known. Pure truth, pure light, goodness, absolute goodness. It's the unconditional. And then it moves to the conditional, to history, to you, to societies, to cultures. And every society, and every culture, and every people, and everything you see reflects, has a little sparkle of the unconditional in its condition. So I'm a condition. David Galston from Winnipeg, Manitoba in Canada. What am I doing here? I have no idea, but I was invited and I came along. And I'm particular. I've got a certain genetic makeup, I got a history, I got a way of looking at the world. I can't help it. But it's particular, partial, conditioned. But according to Platonic thought, even this particular, partial, conditioned person has a little glimmer, a little spark of the unconditional. And because of that unconditional, I get this out of Plato. And he's not even my hero. I'm sometimes very anti-Platonic, but anyway, I get this out of Plato. Integrity. I get integrity. Because my conditional has a spark of the unconditional. Now if we took, and this is just a metaphor for Plato. Again, it's not a proposition about reality. It's just a metaphor. Everything that is conditional in the world has a spark of the unconditional. And so every society, we talked a little bit about the problems of colonialism and European hegemony of First Nations. You know, we were not good Platonists. If we were good Platonists, as European historians, we would come along and we would say, here's another conditional, a people. And they too have a spark. Integrity. They have truth. They have a way of seeing it. A way of being in the world. And we can learn from them. Because all of us are the same. We're all equally ignorant. But we all have integrity. We all have a bit of integrity. And that's the basic Platonic thought. And when you compare Plato to other ancient people, he's pretty decent. He was slightly feminist. I mean, in an ancient way. Don't go to him for feminism. But in an ancient way, and in his context, he was a little bit better than Aristotle. He didn't have the idea that human reproduction, this is Aristotle, human reproduction, the point of reproduction, the aim of reproduction is to get males. And when you miss your target, you get a female. That's Aristotle. And that's right in Roman Catholicism today still. Sorry about that. Whatever. I hope I'm not being recorded internationally, but that thinking is still there, and it's part of the heritage of Western sexism. But Plato didn't have that. He had a much more positive view of women, because they too have the spark of truth. In his ancient way, he did that. And so now, for us, it's not us and them anymore. So forget about that. But for Plato, it was that element. All right, so this is why I wanted to say that, start with Plato, because when he does his theory of forms, which I'll explain, I guess, he's trying to give a metaphor about how truth works. And that means that he's not making propositions about how the world really is. He's doing this other kind of thinking. He's doing this poetic form of thinking. He's opening up pictures. He's opening up visions about how you can think about the world. And that's important to religion. Because religion, I'm going to say, I said last night, is not propositional truth. You know, God exists as a proposition. That's not really religion. Religion is more like a poetic form of truth, or a metaphorical form of truth, or this picture form of truth. It's an equally valid way to think about the world, but it's not propositional. And our trouble is that we seem to have lost this second half of how human beings can experience the world, the metaphorical way we can do it. And we've really opted into the scientific, factual way of doing it, and we've put religion right in with that science and factual understanding. And of course, religion's not going to stand up with science and factual understanding. Of course, it's going to look like it's nonsense. I'd agree it's nonsense. And if I was only looking at religion scientifically, I absolutely would be an atheist. I like Richard Dawkins. But that's not the whole picture. And that's not the only way to have experience as a human being. The other way is this metaphorical way of having experience. So Plato's an example of that second way. And the other thing I want to say is that when we look at ancient people, so we're going to look at, after this, we'll look at Jesus, historical Jesus. When we look at ancient people like the Bible, or like Plato, philosophy, ancient philosophy, these folks are like a foreign land. And we have to carefully go over them, because they don't have a lot of the things that we assume they have. We're good at assuming that when we see writing, it's meant to be scientific and literal and technical. And we often read ancient books, like the Bible, exactly like that, as if it was yesterday's publication, and it's making claims about reality. So we need to use good knowledge, the best we can, to get back into the experience of antiquity. But once you're at antiquity, for the sake of Jesus, don't bring modernity with you, because it's not the modern world. It's a world that has its own integrity, its own sparks of truth. So there's a respect that's necessary for ancient people. All right, so when you talk about religion, if you talk about religion as this metaphorical form of being human, then you can see that it has greatness to it. And it has greatness to it because it's a way of relating ourselves to the world, finding position in the world, finding meaning in the world, finding ways to relate to other people respectfully, finding ways to love, finding ways to forgive, finding ways to transform our lives or our societies. So it's a way, what I call, it's a way of negotiating with the world. It's not a way of proclaiming what the world is or what it has to be. It's a way of creating relationship. And that is very biblical. There's a great word for that in the Bible, which we all know. It's the word covenant. Covenants create relationships. The covenants are not facts or propositions. They are established relationships, agreements, negotiations. One of the great things about the Bible, and this is going to sound funny, I don't really believe in God, right? Because God's a proposition. It's presented to us as a fact. As I said, I'm modern enough to say, well, there's no such thing. But I'm also, hopefully, philosophical enough to say, but I know it's metaphorical knowledge, a different kind of knowledge. It's not a proposition. When we read the Bible, what's fascinating is that God is a character. So not a fact or ultimate reality or the creator of the universe. There's crazy stories, but not this giant, powerful being, but really like a literary character. And God negotiates with Moses and Abraham. Well, why? Because God has a covenant, a negotiating platform with these other characters in the Bible. So you have to look at God as a character, and sometimes God is brutal. And the people of Israel debate with God and sometimes do not like God. After the Exodus, I'm getting off track, nevertheless, after the Exodus, perfect story, and they make the golden calf and everything, and God's up there on the mountain doing the negotiating with Moses and get the Torah worked out. Moses comes down, sees everybody, the tablets are broken. God gets really upset. This stiff-necked people, you know what I'm going to do, Moses? I'm going to wipe them out. The first threat of genocide against the people of Israel is from God. And Moses has to say to God, are you crazy? What will the nations think? What will the Gentiles think of you as a God? To bring these people out of Egypt and then wipe them out here. They're going to think, what kind of a God is that? And so God says to Moses, this is in Numbers and also in Exodus, God says to Moses, well, you're right. I won't do it. See? Negotiating. Negotiating reality. I won't do it. But I'll tell you what, none of you guys are going to get to the promised land. See, that's God's final word. The next generation can get in, but not this one. But the covenant is like this negotiation of reality. And religion is like that. So we look at these different ways. You can have these primal worldviews that are ways of understanding your place in the world, the beauty of the world. The world is our creator. The earth is our mother. We're all children of the earth. We're caretakers. We don't own anything. We're caretakers of things. This is a very, very interesting, important way. Is all that factual? Of course, it's not fact. It's not meant to be factual. It's a metaphorical way of negotiating or finding our place or having covenant in the world. And then we did these other ones, worldview and knowledge and psychology and poetic. We're going to do more about the poetic later on when we do historical Jesus, because the parables of Jesus are fundamental to recovering the Jesus of history, and they are all like that. They're metaphorical and poetic, and they kind of negotiate reality. They're covenantal forms of thinking, but made into story. So, I maybe should have started like that last night, but I didn't. Okay. Today, now what I want to do is just extend the problem of God and why God became a problem for us today, and begin to talk about postmodern thinking, which is a little bit different than what we're used to. We're used to factual thinking. And religion got caught up in that, and this is why God has become a problem. At least in my point of view. And again, my conditioned, point of view, right? I'm not the unconditional. I'm just a condition. What happened is, in the history of Western thinking and the experience of Christianity, largely through the Middle Ages and into Europe and then into the Enlightenment era, is that there began to be this separation of knowledge between the authority of the Bible and the witness of nature. And this happened to become a philosophy that's called nominalism. And nominalism became the foundational philosophy of postmodern thinking. It just occurred to me, I never did explain Plato's forms, but let's forget about them for now. That could be a question later. So this is what happens. About the time of 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, it became important in this experience, and we touched on this last night, to prove that God existed. It became important because the Western world became aware of other religious traditions in a way that it never really had before, and it had to admit that there were other religions. In fact, our word religion is really born out of this time, contact with the Islamic world. And so you got this reintroduction of Aristotle, who was a philosopher, you don't need to worry about him at the moment, and this idea that we could use reason to prove that God existed. Now, why did we want to prove that God existed? Well, because we wanted to prove we had the right God, of course. That's why. So you start using reason, and use natural reason, and rely on the witness of nature to make propositional truths. That's the high Middle Ages. But reason could not make propositional truths that proved the Christian God existed. So you have to introduce something else. So reason, I use natural reason. I can see this church, and I can say, well, somebody constructed this church. And before it was constructed, somebody had a plan. Somebody drew up a plan. See, my natural reason takes me to the edge. Now I can ask, who drew up the plan? My reason can't answer that question. So now you've got religion playing an entirely new role. Revelation answers the question. God drew up the plan. The Christian God. How do you know? Well, reason took me to the edge of that answer, but the Bible completes it. Revelation gives me the answer. So the Bible began to take on authority that it never really had before in Western history. A very powerful document that starts to explain ultimate reality. And up until the Reformation and after, the Bible was used to explain geography, to explain the origin of language. The first language in the world, what was it? Hebrew. That was the Middle Ages. We don't say that anymore, of course, but that's what they thought. Why? Because the Bible is written in Hebrew. So the Bible became this source of knowledge, power, revelation. And as I like to put it, this Bible started to become very heavy. It was a heavy document. You couldn't lift it up anymore. Only the church could handle it. But as that's going on, natural reason continues its path. And this became, and I'm sorry to use this word, but I'm just trying to go through the story. This became nominalism. And nominalism is the reverse of Plato. It says that truths are not sparks in us. They're not the integrity of life or living things. They're not this integration of the unconditional in the conditional. That's not truth. Truth is created by language. We see things, we name them, and the name takes on the power of truth. So the name, it's the language holds the truth. And so we can't know anything about God, or about, this is the nominalists. You can't know anything about God. The only way you can know anything about God is revelation. But revelation is not for us. It's God's freedom. Revelation is the freedom of God. So God, in nominalism, this is again in the Middle Ages still, we're just going to leave it in a second. God in the nominalist movement is free. So the nominalists were very liberal for us. For the Middle Ages they were troubling, but for us they're very liberal, because they would say things like, the freedom of God means if God doesn't want you to be saved by the crucifixion, then God doesn't have to do that. God can save you another way. God could decide that that's enough crucifixion for me, I've got something else for you now. God could say, I've had enough of Christianity, I want another religion. See, the freedom of God. We don't know the freedom of God. We don't have access to it. All our truths are linguistic truths. We only participate in truth by creating experience in our language. And our language becomes the way that human beings interact and understand truth, but it's not revelation. God's beyond that. All right, now we're going to take another step. Why do we need God then? That's the Enlightenment. Why do we need God? If we can do it all with nature and natural knowledge, and if truth is our language and what we construct in language, what's the point of having God? Good question. What's the church's answer? Retreat. Back to authority. Try to find the authority. Where's that heavy Bible we were talking about? But it's not working anymore. It's not working anymore. We don't need the Bible to explain the world. We don't need the Bible to explain language. We don't need the Bible to explain the multiplicity of life forms on the planet Earth. We don't need the Bible for cosmology anymore, for the origin of the universe. We don't need it really to explain anything. Natural reason still works fine. So, now we're hitting just into the 20th century, and we're going to get postmodern thought. So modern thought is we're going to invest our resources in science. And modern skepticism is religion doesn't really matter anymore. I'm not interested in it. It doesn't give me an answer. Science does. But of course, human beings are poetic, so we can never totally leave religion alone. Because religion's poetry. Anyway, 20th century now, modern and now postmodern thought. And this is where I'm going to sort of begin to wind up a bit, and then I'll go into these slides.